So for our next session, we're going to be leading into a fireside chat, and it's actually going to be looking at tackling the document understanding challenge at Cushman Wakefield, looking at strategies for automating unstructured content. As I'm sure many of our attendees are aware, Cushman Wakefield is among the world's largest commercial real estate services firm. And after beginning their digital transformation journey, they realized they needed a powerful tool to intake and understand their unstructured content. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Brandi Corbello, VP of Transformation for Cushman Wakefield, and Tom Wilde, the CEO for Indico. And they're going to have a very exciting conversation today. So please take the virtual stage.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jordan. Brandi, welcome. Excited to chat with you here this morning on this topic, which I think has become such a popular topic in the last, certainly in the last year. Let me start maybe with some more detailed introductions, and then we can get into this topic in some detail. I'll introduce myself first, and then Brandi. So I'm Tom Wilde, the CEO at Indico. The quick description of Indico is we've created a solution for intelligent document understanding that doesn't use a lot of the traditional approaches around rules and templates, and instead allows our customers to build custom machine learning models that can precisely understand the kind of documents and data our customers are dealing with and attempting to automate. I'm very excited to have Brandi with us this morning to talk through some of the approaches and challenges that Cushman went through in trying to tackle unstructured. So Brandi, maybe great to start with a bit more detail around your role at Cushman and how that came about. What are some of the key responsibilities you've got on your plate there?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Excited to be here with you. My role at Cushman is really to think about, I joined about 2 years ago. It's been a little over 2 years. And at first it was really to think about automation and RPA and how we kind of apply that to the business and the business value behind it. But as we started getting into a lot of the processes, we realized it's not just RPA, it's not just this rule-based approach when it comes to automation, and really creating this, bigger or more breadth of a technology stack that enables end-to-end automation, which is why we brought in NLP, or document understanding, as well.
Talk a little bit maybe for broader context, because I'm sure your experiences as a company has been similar, but maybe there are some differences as well. What caused automation to become such a big initiative at Cushman? Where did that come from? And because I think it is a very sort of strategic initiative at Cushman.
Yeah, so we have a lot of services. Well, a lot of our business has been kind of acquired through time, right? And we've tried to really create synergies, onshore, and our business leaders were actually challenged with creating higher margins. And with that, they were asked to look at potentially offshoring some of the roles that they had, or having some labor arbitrage, or more of a mix of, what their workforce looks like. And, when I joined, we came in and we said, hey, you can leapfrog some of this, right? If you think about automation and really, truly create this more optimal workforce, which is digital, offshore, and onshore.
Terrific. You guys have a very strong sort of center of excellence approach to automation. What are some of the lessons learned you've had in standing that up? Because, what I've observed is you have a very strong relationship with your line of business and the use cases that they bring to the table for you guys. So what were some of your lessons learned in getting that COE for automation stood up in the first place?
It's interesting. I came from consulting, and I watched a lot of clients go through standing up a COE, and we watched a lot of the resistance to, automation from the technology or the business side. So I think I had a lot of lessons learned from my consulting days and watching clients try to execute something similar in the past. But, for us, we actually didn't have a lot of resistance in the organization. I would say that the toughest part is we actually do sit in between the business and technology. We're not in either. So the toughest part was actually getting, our technology team to really understand what it is that we do, and like how they help enable us in order to enable the business. So, the beginning was really, standing up the center of excellence, finding our place in the organization and preparing to prove success early, because really a large part of how we started was this awareness campaign with all of our leaders, right? And they were so excited about it. We knew coming out of that, which was about a 2-month engagement, we would have to be able to like kind of hit the ground running and realize value quick, or they wouldn't engage with us anymore because we were a new group in the organization. So that really meant thinking about our infrastructure, our governance, and how we would engage with them as we stepped forward.
Talk a bit about the sort of maturity journey. I think you started with RPA. Maybe talk about a bit how you kind of went from RPA and kind of got to the point where unstructured became center of the plate and intelligent process automation. How long did that take, and how did you get from sort of the initial sort of RPA use cases to the more sort of complex use cases?
Yeah, for sure. So we started with RPA, and then we quickly realized a lot of the inputs to processes at Cushman, it's a real estate company. There's a lot of paper here. We quickly realized a lot of our inputs were documents, and all types of documents, right? They all differed, and even in a similar document type, it's differed, right? So we started, it was probably about 3 to 6 months down the path of, implementing RPA. We quickly realized in order to realize value in a lot of our processes, we need document understanding. So we really started exploring, different, technologies that could enable us. But for us, we realized what is truly structured is actually not really structured, right? So like you think about invoices and, people will say that's a structured document. It's actually it's semi-structured. I would actually say it's unstructured, right? Because you've got thousands of vendors that all format their invoices differently. They all have different types of words. They're all like using different formats. Also, by the way, like with the way technology is changing, their invoice formats are changing all the time, right? And their processes are changing, right? So our inputs, even from a vendor from a year ago, may look different today than they did yesterday.
Yeah, that degree of variability, I agree. Invoices is always a great example, because any one of us as sort of people would look at an invoice and say, well, that has structure to it, right? It has a invoice number and a vendor name and line items, but the actual position of that information on the document or the vocabulary used to describe those things is basically infinite, right? They're like, I kind of describe them as almost snowflakes, which to your point makes them truly unstructured. What surprised you? So why not RPA? Why did you have to go to IPA? And what surprised you as you started to look for solutions in this category?
Yeah, I think RPA is you really have to define the rules of engagement, right? So it's never going to give you a full end-to-end life cycle. So you think about a typical end-to-end process, and you want to be strategic in how you think about automating that or enabling it for the business users, so that way they could actually get upskilled to do like their jobs of the future, if you will. A part of their job or their process is probably rule-based, but a part of it is actually kind of contextually trying to understand my inputs before I start kind of following the rules. So that's why we went to IPA, only because we're able to learn. And, I think it's even vice versa too. Like, I actually don't want machine learning models on some part of my process because I want it to follow the rules. I want to see the exceptions fall out. And for us, we really wanted this optimal end-to-end automation with human in the loop when necessary. So sometimes when you just go down the RPA path, you kind of get stopped, right? And then a person kind of picks it up, and then you've got to trigger a bot again. Well, we don't really want to do that. We want the person to interact with automation where the person needs to, and then let the automation kind of pick up from there. So really that's the difference and why we kind of have both in-house.
And when you think of that, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to go to your surprise question, but.
Yeah, you touch on an interesting point here, which is when you started to talk to line of business about some of their use cases, how did you navigate this tension between, straight through 100% automation versus augmentation or sort of human-centered augmented approaches? Because there's, I think, a lot of, maybe not the word confusion, but I think there's a developing understanding of what AI can do and can't do, and setting those expectations is so critical. So how have you approached that with line of business where, those folks are even further from the technology, right? They just know they have a particular business problem.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's a challenge that we continue to have as we engage with new business users. And I imagine my peers will have, as they start implementing this technology, I think people that are not as close to the technology have this expectation that, RPA or, machine learning or AI could like take everything on, right? So like business leaders will say, like, if we come in and we say, hey, we're going to do this NLP thing, it's going to understand documents and it's going to help you process these documents, right? In their mind, really the expectation on the upfront is, oh, this is going to take over the whole thing, right? And we kind of have to level set with them and educate them on, this doesn't take away a human in the loop, as I had mentioned, right? This actually, it just enables our workers, right, to focus on what's important. So you think about, I always like to call it the activity of control F, right? This control F activity that people go through to find things in documents in order to get that data in the structured format that we need, we kind of take that away first, right? So like, instead of somebody having to control F or read an entire document, let us kind of navigate them through the document in the right places, right? And they can say yes or no, right? But through time, as we get more confident, certain fields, they won't need to review anymore. So it's really taking away like that 40% lift of, trying to find places on the document or trying to understand the document like to its entirety and really having them focus on what's important.
Yeah, so in maybe with a different angle on it, that augmentation itself can generate the ROI. It doesn't have to just be straight through. And I think that's a big distinction with RPA, right? That RPA is sort of binary. It either performs its job or it doesn't, where AI and IPA type solutions, there's more of a spectrum of how well it's performing. But depending on how complex and expensive the people are doing those tasks, that augmentation alone can generate the ROI.
Oh, 100%, right? And that's typically the messaging we come back with, which is this, people will still be involved, but this takes away, 40% of the involvement they had, which is the equivalent of X amount of dollars that we're spending just to, understand these documents.
When you talk about ROI with management, is it always sort of labor savings, or is there something strategic that goes with it when you think about automation initiatives?
So I think it's a twofold. So one is labor savings, but reinvestment in that labor, right? So if people aren't, reviewing a document, they could actually be spending their time doing more, right? So like maybe more value add services. So that's the first piece. It is labor savings, but it could be a reinvestment into that labor to be doing more value add type activities. But then the second part of the conversation is actually like, 80 to 90% of our data is unstructured. And that 80 to 90% is actually the most valuable data because it's our daily transactions, right? It's not data that's structured. So if we can actually get it into a way that we're able to action on it or put it in, a structured manner, like we've actually created new benefit, right? Not just for us, but potentially for our clients, because now we have a full understanding of all of this data that we didn't have access to before.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed about Cushman is you have a really strong emphasis on creating this sort of second order assets around data, and the ability to turn unstructured into data drives, it's not just the labor savings, it's actually you're creating intellectual property as sort of the exhaust of these processes. That sounds like kind of very high, priority strategic initiative at Cushman is that sort of data as an asset.
Yeah, we, I'm sure like similar, old school industries, we haven't been able to tap into that data, and that data is rich and it could give us a lot. It could give us new products. It could help with service offerings. It could, enable like clients. It could actually differentiate us. Like a lot of what we do is the same across a lot of CRE organizations. So how do we actually use this data to differentiate ourselves or like create new products or enable or empower services differently?
There are solutions in the market where they sort of have this, give us your data, we'll give you, a technology sort of pitch. And I know you evaluated some of those, and some of them, maybe that value has its own second order benefits, but I know that was important to you that, you guys felt like Cushman data was Cushman's data, and this sort of data pooling was not a good strategic outcome for you guys. How did you think about that?
Yeah, I think like on the data pooling front, like typically like if we send the data, we're put into a box, right? And whatever they're doing with our data, like we're just getting the output. So say we said, oh, we want to extract a new field, or we actually want to abstract this field differently, or this, these fields need to go into this use case, we actually then have to go back to them, right, and say, hey, this is how we want this thing that's already in production to change. And we kind of get put onto a product backlog. And for us, like, we really wanted to own and have the flexibility of change, especially given the current environment and where things are going with technology, right? We need to be able to change on the fly, and we need to be able to do it quickly.
Yep. What have you noticed about your stakeholders internally in terms of their sophistication in bringing you use cases that are sort of well-formed? Are you still having to do a lot of massaging of those requirements and use cases, or have you seen that grow in terms of, they start to be able to self-identify, hey, this is a good use case for unstructured, this is a good use case for structured, et cetera?
Our approach in general to automation has been interesting. We kind of took this top-down approach to start. So really thinking strategically about where in the organization automation fits and creates the most value. So we did that. And then the way my team kind of started forming, or the transformation team started forming, is they're actually tied to business units, right? So I have 4 different, people that report to me, and then they have, process analysts that report to them. And these folks are really getting embedded into their business partnerships. So they're really getting an understanding of what these folks are doing every day, what their inputs are, and where things could be applicable. So for us, it kind of started with this top-down approach, but as the analysts on my team are getting closer to the business, they're starting to see, like, where is the true value, and what are these inputs? And then typically what we'll do is we'll do a demo pilot, and then we're off to the races because they see, oh, this makes sense. Or, we just had a call the other day with our marketing team showing them what Indico could do. And like the light bulb kind of went off for them on, oh my gosh, it could do this for us, right? So I think it's, continuous education, and just having the team, partnered with different business units has really enabled everybody to understand what it is and how it could help them.
On that, kind of that same vein, I know one of the things that was important to you was technologies that could be used by business owners rather than sort of, all in some ways bottlenecked with a single team that had to have a very high level of technical skills. What are some of the things you've seen in terms of the skill levels required, and how important was it to Cushman to have, a lower code or no code type interface? And is that something you're trying to do more of in the future with the tools you select?
For us, I think it was really about the breadth of use cases we have, right? So like when it came to tool selection, we could have probably picked 3 different tools, right? And like they would have been really good for like very narrowly focused use cases. But then if you take a step back and you strategically say, like, what is the breadth of what I'm trying to do here? Like, what are my different documents? I know, like, on document processes, people will have to be involved, especially right now. So how do I actually pick a tool that allows for flexibility, but creates a seamless user experience across these use cases? So for us, it was really more about, how do my users interact with this tool, and how do I create the seamless user experience interface? So that way, like, whether they're looking at bank statements, or they're looking at invoices, or they're looking at leases, or whatever it is, right? Like, it's the same user experience for them. So it's, the change management is less. I think, that was like a big part of our decision, and, not to be so narrowly focused on one process or different processes in silos, but instead, what's the breadth of our strategy that we're trying to go after here, and how do we create this seamless, infrastructure, as well as like seamless user experience. So that was a big part. Now, as far as no code, I don't know if we're in a place of no code right now, to be completely honest. I do think we're getting to a place of low code, and I think that's always going to be, desktop low complexity automations. But if I can at least enable the users to understand the technology and what it's doing for them in their process, and like how it's like creating optimization, I've at least gotten far enough right now. So that's kind of where we're at. And, I think, my team, we have a SME on my team now that's completely dedicated to our Indico platform. And I think, for him, like, we're able to deploy a pilot within 3 weeks. So I think, as far as that's concerned, we're able to stand things up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it seems that the sort of low code to no code conversation, the key is that we found is there's a moment when you need the business user to contribute to the project. And if they can do that through an interface that doesn't require, 3 months of training, then adoption grows quickly. And and it does seem that you guys made the decision you were going to go for best-in-class solutions across a set of capabilities, have that as the sort of Cushman automation fabric, and then be able to drive that throughout the organization to make sure you've got consistent sort of approaches to adoption. To your point, being able to do, rapid pilots and POCs because you're not buying 15 point solutions.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. When you think about trends in automation, we touched on one of them here, which is sort of this low code strategy. What are other things you're looking at Cushman as you look out, 1-2 years from now in terms of automation that's bubbling up?
Yeah, I think for us, we've started, we have machine learning models in some of our processes that are outside of document understanding. And, we've taken a step back to say, like, I think at one point we were saying, oh, we're unbiased in this process, right? But when we actually looked at it, we actually had bias in that process with the machine learning model because it was making decisions based on what we've done in the past. So our biases were naturally already embedded in that machine learning model and the decisions that that model was making. So I think for us it's really going to be about continuing to create machine learning models. I do think it's kind of the wave of the future, but where we need to go at this point is really the governance around AI and like evaluating and monitoring our algorithms, one for effectiveness, two for risk, and then really bias and value, because if you're going to continue to maintain a machine learning model, you need to ensure that it's still continuing to give value to the business or any automation, right? Like, doesn't matter what it is, if it's, a machine learning model, if it's RPA, if it's NLP, whatever it is, like you've got to make sure that the business is still getting value out of it. I think you and I have talked about this. I think blockchain is going to be really important, especially as you start thinking about like, what's the point in time documents perish, right? So like they cease to exist. And we have this digitally embedded, data kind of sitting in the blockchain. Well, I think that we are still going to have a problem with unstructured data because even though those transactions are similar, the parties that have like kind of come into those transactions are different. So when it comes out, it's still going to look unstructured in nature. So you've got to start thinking about how do I continue to create those transactions into a structured way before they enter my ecosystem. Those are really the things that are top of mind, because for me, I'm like, I'd love for documents to go away because there's so many in commercial real estate, but it's kind of staying ahead.
Yeah, in some ways, we often talk about this internally as well. What actually is a document? And in some ways, I think the conclusion we've reached is, at the end of the day, a document is sort of a user interface, right? It's a user interface to a set of semi or unstructured data that it just optimized for, sort of us to consume, right? And so if you frame it that way, documents probably don't go away per se, right? The notion that we have documents today does, but that a user interface for unstructured doesn't go away because unstructured will continue to be part of how we communicate and how we transact. So the problem remains. Yeah, the challenge remains.
For sure.
I want to scratch at one thing you said, which is when you think about more adoption of AI and machine learning in the enterprise, what are some of the sort of governance challenges? And talk maybe a little bit about this notion of AI explainability and what you're expecting in the tools you're evaluating in terms of their ability to give you that, communicate to you bias and how it's making its decisions. Is that blooming in importance to Cushman as you start to onboard more AI?
I think we're just scratching the surface, right? One, we're trying right now, we're in the middle of like, how do we see that bias has been created, and what's the thing that we can start doing to, kind of fight that bias, and I think it's, we're in a place where we're starting to think about, do we randomize things, right? To say like, okay, you didn't choose this, but if I put this on a different path, would you have chosen it, right? So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think there's a long way for the industry to go to actually start doing like kind of having this explainability and like really challenging or pushing themselves, right? And I think for us it's more about the analytics on the back end, right? It's like what is a machine learning model telling us? What is it not telling us? And then whatever it's not telling us, how do we start saying like, should it be telling us this? And And how do you ask those questions the right way?
It's always kind of a fascinating moment when we do an implementation where you have a set of line of business users doing some data labeling to create this custom model. And they all bring their own lens to that, right? How they've been doing it in the past. And when we ask them at the start of the project, usually we'll say, is everyone on the same page about, how you're going to label this data? And the answer is always yes, 100%. We've been doing this a long time. We're all on the same page. And then when they actually do the data labeling, we can show them the analytics and say, there's about a 20% difference in how you're all labeling this. And it's kind of a really kind of a moment of wow, for 25 years we've been doing this, yet we're all doing it, slightly differently. So that's kind of a fascinating moment in the AI journey for sure at companies. Well, good stuff. Jordan, I don't know if there's questions from the audience. I know we've got about 4 minutes left, so I wanted to make sure we leave a couple of minutes for questions.
I'm so glad you reached out and asked Tom. We do actually have 2 questions. The first is from Vanud Galani, and he would like to know that if you have a common framework to quantify value.
Well, I'll toss that to Brandi and have her talk about sort of how, we touched on it a bit, but how has Cushman sort of defined value or ROI?
Yeah, so for us, we typically, we look at, hours saved, from like an automation, but we also will look at things like, so it depends on the use case. Part of it is also, for revenue generating roles, for instance, like, are we hiring faster because automation is like helping the process? If so, then that means we're recognizing revenue sooner than we would have because we're hiring X amount of days sooner than we did. So for us, it really depends on the use case, but we do have, kind of some levers that we pull on as the team goes through and quantifies business value.
The analogy I like to share often is, I think unfortunately, this sort of robot as a metaphor for automation is a little bit unfortunate, because when we think about a robot, we think about it comes in, sits down, and does the job perfectly, and we never have to deal with it again. It's not really reality in AI broadly. So we like to use this sort of robotic arm as a bionic arm as a better analogy, right? We're affixing this bionic arm to knowledge experts and suddenly making them 10 times more effective. So I think that's a better metaphor, the bionic arm.
So we do have another question as well. Looking at, I think it's 2 questions from Dave Brakovich, and he wants to know, after data is extracted from unstructured documents, are they being reviewed by human users?
It depends on use case, but I'll let Brandi talk about how Cushman's doing this.
Yeah, so it does depend on use case. And if the document is lower complex, no matter what the document is, we usually put it on a path, right? So like on day 1 in production, people will still be reviewing probably all of the fields in the essence of they're just saying, yes, you're right, or no, you're wrong, and then kind of correcting, right? So that's like the first 30 days. Then you go into 60 days and you say, okay, for fields that you're, the model is, 98% confident or higher, like people don't need to review it anymore. So those kind of get turned off, and people are reviewing fields that the model has lower confidence on. Then like when you get to the 90-day mark, you're basically saying like, okay, you're comfortable with this document and we have a lot of confidence. So the only time you should ever review anything is if it's under, 70% or whatever the metrics are that we put in place. So that's where I'm saying there will always be human in the loop components, because there's always an exception, right? And there's always going to continue to be exceptions, but really it's what's the process and the transition of, kind of first the control F function I had mentioned, but then lastly, like really how much review does a human need to have through time?
Yeah, we often describe it as what Brandi just walked through as a flight path. So a model has a flight path, and you kind of take off, and you hit different altitudes, at milestones along the way to get to either full automation or augmentation goals.
Oh, perfect. Well, I just wanted to let you know as well, Tom, and Brandi, Dave mentioned that he's really enjoying the topic and he'd love to learn more and I think he was very interested in the use cases, but I know that that's all we have time for right now.